Should you use Times New Roman as the main font for your book, for your novel? Um, well, the short answer is no. Uh, don't use Times New Roman. Find something else. Find anything else. There's plenty of choice for what you can use for your main font. Plenty of serif fonts, plenty of old style fonts. Well, Times New Roman is a transitional font, but plenty of old style and transitional fonts that are much, much better choices. I always default to things like Garamond and that style of font, but you can also go for things like what is it, Minion and Georgia and all that sort of thing, which are much better choices. That's the short answer. No, don't use it. Find something else. Now for the much longer, rambly answer. I suppose there are two two categories of reason, really, why one should not use Times New Roman for your book, for your novel. The first of those is simply that Times New Roman was, for a great many years, the default font in Microsoft Word. And I think probably a variety of Microsoft Office programs. I can't remember which ones. Certainly some of them it wasn't. I think for Excel, I don't think it ever was for Excel. Well, I don't know. But it would have been for Word, and it would have been, I think, for Publisher as well. And I forget what the old suite of Microsoft Office apps was, but yes, it was the default font for quite a few of them for quite a long time. And it's funny nowadays because I can't remember exactly when they stopped using it as the default font, but I think it was quite a while ago now. I have a suspicion it might have been sometime in the 2000s, which is horrifying that's quite a while ago now, but it doesn't seem that long ago to me. They at some point they changed to Calibri. I think that was maybe in the late 2000s. I don't know. I have a strange suspicion it was like 2007 or 2008, but I don't know. And then they've changed it again more recently after that. So it hasn't been the default font for a while, but there are a lot of people like me who will remember it as being the default font for quite some time, and it's sort of instantly recognizable as being the default font. And of course, the trouble is that even if you say, actually, no, you really like Times New Roman, you just really like the font, you just like how it looks, and you like its proportions, you think it's going to look good in your book and so on. Even if you like it and you choose it very deliberately for your book, anyone who sees it in your book is just going to think, oh, they forgot to change the default font, even though it hasn't been the default font for a while. There's a whole generation of people like me who are just going to look at it and think, oh, they just didn't change it from the default font. Even if you made a deliberate choice, we're just going to assume that. So that really is one reason why you can't use it. It's even if you are not using it in an amateurish way, it's going to look it. And I would say, I mean, Times New Roman, in some ways is a bit of an odd font. In some ways is a bit peculiar. It can be a bit tricky to use. I'll get onto that in a moment. But you can use it well. There are ways of using it nicely. If you're very careful with it, you can certainly do that. But again, it's just going to look like the default font. That's one sort of category of reason. The other is that, personally, I'm not too much of a fan of Times New Roman. I think Times New Roman is a bit of an unusual font when you really sort of get into it and when you really look at some of its proportions and so on. Times New Roman, if I remember correctly, is officially classified as a transitional font, which is to say it's somewhere between the old style serif fonts and the Didone fonts. By the way, there's some contention around the pronunciation of the word Didone. I'll do another video on that. I say Didone. I'm not going to get into it in this video, but I say Didone because I'd read the word for so many years before saying it out loud. But as I say, Times New Roman is somewhere between these sort of old style fonts, the Didone ones, and the more you sort of look at it, it becomes quite apparent, and I think it makes the font look a bit peculiar. It's just got a few sort of oddities to it that, for me, I think it makes it not as nice as a variety of other fonts. I think there are a lot of better options, um, and that really is the second reason, the second category of reason why not to use it. One of the things that I think is quite. I mean, I don't think I noticed this about Times New Roman for a while, but I think Times New Roman it feels like a bit of a squashed font. I wonder. Let me just if I might be able to explain what if it. No, I'm gonna mess that up. So what I mean by that is that here we've got sort of big capital letter T, and the letter T is always a good letter form to use as a reference point. You see that the lowercase letters here, the difference in height between the lowercase and the top of the uppercase ones, it's not huge. It's obviously apparent, but it's just not massive. Like if you look down here as well, the R isn't hugely rising above all of the other letters. Essentially, all of the capitals they don't quite reach up enough. They're not quite sort of tall and proud enough compared to the lowercase letters. And even when you just look within the lowercase letters themselves, this is generally easier to sort of work out when you've got some next to stuff. I'm not going to mess it up. The lowercase letters sort of really fill the box that they're in quite a bit, and so it overall gives this sort of slightly squashed appearance to the font. And I think the reason for that, the reason why it's like that, is because, and I'm just guessing here, is because this was, I think, intended to be used in newspapers. And of course, when you're printing a newspaper, you're printing a lot of relatively small text. And when you're printing small text, you don't want a massive difference between the size of the uppercase and the lowercase letters, because the uppercase letters are pretty much going to determine your line height. Well, it's pretty much just a function of the line height. You don't want the lowercase letters to be so much smaller that actually then it becomes hard to read. You sort of want them, without looking weird, as similar as possible in height. So I think that's why that is, but I'm just guessing. I also think that Times New Roman looks, just the overall look of it always seems a bit strange to me. If it like, this is going to be a terrible way of showing it, but Times New Roman, I think, often looks rather sharp. If you look at the N here, you've got these very, very sort of sharp. So I always think they look, at smaller font sizes, they look sharp, and they really are. They've got a bit of width to them, but they sort of look spindly. It sort of looks a bit like old furniture. You've got this very sort of narrow stem, really spreading out into quite a wide serif with this very sort of complete arching to the side. On the one hand, it's a bit sharp, and then you have other letters which just feel a bit blobby. And I was trying to look for some examples of them. The letter R here, you've got this, you've got this terminal here, which is rather blobby. And there's probably it's kind of difficult to work out which one's going to be. A's got it. C's got it. Like G hasn't got it. There's no blob sitting up here, as you sometimes get with the G, or down here. E doesn't have it, which is a bit unusual. The letter E you might sometimes get a sort of blob appearing. I mean, I forget what the official or proper name for those, but like in this case they're not ball terminals in the strictest sense, because they're not sort of perfectly round, but it's in that sort of area. You get this sort of blobbiness appearing in places, and then a real sharpness elsewhere. The letter F really shows it. This is all sort of organic and blobby up here, and this is very sharp and sort of furniture-like, which personally I'm not very much a fan of. It sort of doesn't have the organic appeal of the older style fonts, but it also doesn't have quite the sort of rigidity and geometry of the Didone fonts, which is sort of a problem with sort of transitional fonts in general. So I've long thought that Times New Roman has a bit of an identity crisis. It sort of doesn't quite know what it wants to be, um, um, combined with being somewhat squashed. It's italic form as well. I think. Let me do the whole thing in italics. Its italic form, I think, as well, is a little bit aggressive. It's sort of I mean, if you look at this T here, compare that to its non-italic form, the whole thing's been tipped over. Very often, if you look at a sort of something like a Garabond, when you look at its italic form, there's a bit more sort of elegance to how the change in the serifs is handled and that sort of thing. Times New Roman just goes a bit full on. With its italics. I realise that these are all quite subjective and perceptional things, but I think they do generally have an effect, a common effect for most people when looking at these things in books. So that's the second reason, really. I think Times New Roman, it's even though it was the default, I sort of think it was a bit of a strange choice for the default for the Microsoft programs, and I think it has some peculiarities to it that make it not the most delicious font to look at. I'm not sure why they chose it, but they did, and so that's the second category of reason, is just that I think there are a lot better choices. There are some absolutely wonderful fonts out there. This is not one of them. It's a bit rigid. It's a bit squashed. It's not a great pleasure to look at. And when you're formatting a book, I think it's always good to keep the motivation in mind that a page, any page in your book, should just be delicious to look at. There's I think book formatting is almost thought of as just like, oh, that's just a thing you've got to do. That's just a sort of thing. You just have to do that at the end. It's just what everyone does. No. If you're really careful about things like font choice and spacing and all this sort of thing, you can make every single page just absolutely exquisite and delicious to look at. And I think that's actually quite a useful thing to aim for, because if people simply enjoy looking at a page of your book, they might just read it. So I think this stuff does matter. But those are broadly reasons why you should not use Times New Roman for your book. Find something else. I'm hopefully going to do some more episodes of Font Focus on this channel, where I'll go through some nice ones. So have a look at those and choose from that.